And welcome back. Josh Haston here. Jerusalem Minute on JNS TV, coming to you from Jerusalem. My colleague, Alex Trayman, CEO of JNS, he's coming to us from halfway around the world. Alex, where are we catching you on this Sunday?
I'm in New York City. I'm at the Tikva Jewish Leadership Conference.
Well, much success to you, and I'm sure you're representing JNS very well over there at the conference. A lot has happened over the last 24 hours while you were gone. We brought it up on last week's show, the situation in Syria, and lo and behold, it just took a week since we discussed this. The Assad regime falls. Islamic rebels have captured Damascus, forcing Syrian President Bashar Assad to flee. Tremendous news out of the Middle East. Alex, what are you hearing over there?
Well, certainly everybody's trying to figure out what's heads or tails. In Syria, things, as you mentioned, happened very quickly. Really, things escalating over the past week or so. And I think what you're really seeing here is the beginning of the vacuum being created by a weakened Iran. It wasn't very clear to many in this war between Israel and Hamas and Hezbollah and Iran itself, how strong Iran was, how strong Israel was. And here we see that Iran has been significantly weakened to the extent not only did we take out their air defenses, not only did we did Israel take out Hezbollah's, the forward-facing army of Iran in southern Lebanon, but it's created a vacuum whereby Hezbollah, whereby Iran, also whereby Russia, who's busy fighting in the Ukraine, no longer are there to back Bashar Assad, a cruel dictator who's been ruling Syria with a small religious minority over the majority of Sunni Arabs. And now that this vacuum is created, everybody is trying to take control of Syria. It's a dangerous situation, but on the one, and we can talk about that in a minute, but I think this really does signal the tremendous weakening of Iran, and for Israel, that's certainly a good thing.
Yeah, it's absolutely no coincidence that the day that Israel and Hezbollah came to a ceasefire, that was the very exact day that these rebels launched their attack against the Assad regime. And at the same time here, Prime Minister Netanyahu actually taking the credit, saying Israel is responsible, calling this a historic day in the history of the Middle East. Let's go out to that video.
This is a historic day for the Middle East. The collapse of the Assad regime, the tyranny in Damascus, offers great opportunity, but also is fraught with significant dangers. This collapse is a direct result of our forceful action against Hezbollah and Iran, Assad's main supporters. It set off a chain reaction of all those who want to free themselves from this tyranny and its oppression. We gave the Israeli army the order to take over these positions to ensure that no hostile force embeds itself right next to the border of Israel. This is a temporary defensive position until a suitable arrangement is found. Equally, we send a hand of peace to all those beyond our border in Syria, to the Druze, to the Kurds, to the Christians, and to the Muslims who want to live in peace with Israel. We're going to follow events very carefully. If we can establish neighborly relations and a peaceful relations with the new forces emerging in Syria, that's our desire. But if we do not, we'll do whatever it takes to defend the state of Israel and the border of Israel.
So there you have Prime Minister Netanyahu saying the Assad regime fell as a direct result of the blows we inflicted on Iran and Hezbollah, the main supporters of the Assad regime. Alex, I've said this many times over the last 24 hours. Usually you say the enemy of my enemy is my friend, but I don't think that's the reality here in this situation. We have Israeli troops now on the Syrian Hermon in that buffer zone, protecting us in the north, potentially waiting for a potential attack, perhaps, if that's those Sunni rebel groups, one of them, of course, backed by Turkey, decide to turn on the state of Israel.
Well, I think what you mentioned there is very important. And we've seen Israel take a number of steps that they never would have taken if Assad was still in power. The second he has fallen, what have we seen Israel do? We've seen them take a buffer zone inside Syria to protect the Golan Heights, to make sure that these Sunni-backed terror factions don't come near the Israeli border. Israel's communicated with every faction in Syria, telling them, don't come near the Israeli border. Israel's moved forward now into Syrian territory for the first time, and they've entered this buffer zone that they haven't entered since a UN agreement signed in 1974. That's the first thing. The second thing that they've done is that they have struck deep inside Syria at chemical weapons facilities, at other major weapons facilities, to make sure that these weapons don't get into the hands of armed terror factions or other armed groups. So you're seeing Israel, trying also to fill the vacuum. They recognize that with Assad not there, with Iran not there, with Russia not there, that creates a vacuum. And Israel is saying that they will be the ones to fill that vacuum, not to take over Syria, but to determine and make sure that there is stability for Israel in Syria.
Wouldn't it make sense at this juncture for those rebels who took over in Syria to keep their focus to the east, look towards Iraq, their enemies in the Shia groups in Iraq, and of course, Iran? I know that we have to take every precaution here in the state of Israel. We can't have jihadist groups on our northern border, but wouldn't it make sense for them at this point to look towards Tehran?
First they have to look inside Syria. Right now it's a sort of a revolution where you have all kind of armed groups all fighting against each other, all united in their desire to take Bashar Assad out of power. They've done that. But now who runs Syria? Who's really in control? Okay, fine. They pushed Assad's army out. They pushed Assad out. It doesn't mean they're in control of the territory. So I think first things first, you're going to see over the next several weeks and months, the drilling and figuring out who is actually running this country before you're going to see any of these factions just move and run towards the Israeli border or to any other border for that matter.
There are a lot of reactions here. I want to focus on one in particular. President-elect Donald Trump saying yesterday the United States should not interfere in Syria. He made this post on a social media site, the Truth Social site. He said, Syria is a mess, but it is not our friend, and the United States should have nothing to do with it. This is not our fight. Let it play out. Do not get involved, said President Trump. Your thoughts on Trump's comments?
Well, I think that certainly represents, the thoughts of this new isolationist push, this side of the Republican Party, which says, don't get involved. We remember what happened when Obama got involved, when Bill Clinton got involved, when George Bush Sr. and Jr. got involved in the Middle East. You wind up getting yourself entrenched for many, many years. And I think Trump's saying, let these armed factions fight it out. This isn't America's fight. We're not starting another war right now. Now, what's that going to mean in 6 months from now? We don't know. It could be that the United States will come in at a certain point. But meanwhile, I think that Trump's statements are indicative of the approach that he's going to have to the Middle East and to the world, which is not to start getting American troops on the soil in other countries and get the United States embroiled in a mess that it doesn't want to have. And I think that by contrast, what he's doing is he's really signaling the failures of the Obama administration policies regarding Syria, letting Iran come in, supporting Iran, supporting Bashar Assad, putting red lines regarding Assad's use of chemical weapons that he refused to enforce. So you see what happens when a president comes in and tries to establish a policy and can't follow through. It creates a mess. So we'll see what happens with Trump. Meanwhile, he's not even the president. So it's going to be another 5 weeks or so until even becomes the president. But he wants to make sure that he's not inheriting a situation where all of a sudden there's American troops on the ground in another place from day one of his presidency.
I want to stress something you just brought up now, the fact that all of this can be traced back to President Barack Obama when he was in power. I'm talking about the Arab Spring back in, I think it was 2011. And they've just been biding their time, waiting for the right opportunity. But it all goes back to the Obama policies, as you mentioned off the air.
Yeah, I think so. It's you see really the entirety of the destabilization of the region. It dates back to Obama. It was during Obama's administration that you saw this Arab Spring take place. Where America withdrew its support for Hosni Mubarak, who was a stable dictator in Egypt, and he threw his weight behind the Muslim Brotherhood over there. He threw a lot of support behind Recep Erdogan in Turkey, who's also one of the players now inside Syria when he could have been isolated. They threw all of their support behind Iran, as we've discussed many times. They pulled troops out of Iraq. They pulled quickly, and the Biden administration now quickly pulled troops out of Afghanistan. Every time that happens, you see that vacuum getting filled by destabilizing agents. So again, this has been decades of bad American policy coming to bear, and we'll have to see, if and when the dust settles and what the situation looks like in the coming weeks and months.
Ironically, at the same time, over the weekend, the IDF assisting the UN to fend off a rebel attack. Apparently, some of these rebels decided to attack a UN post close to the Israel-Syrian border. And the IDF here, after sustaining so much harm from the UN, whether it's UNIFIL in Lebanon, whether it's UNRWA in Gaza, yet the IDF comes to the rescue of this UN force who came under rebel attack close to our border. How ironic is that?
Well, in this case, the UN force is probably the better of all the factions that are there. But I think that what Israel is saying is they don't want a UN force to be pushed out of the area there, because that will be filled by some kind of much more dangerous front that Israel doesn't want to deal with. Also, Israel wants to demonstrate to the international community that it does not have any ambitions in Syria. It's not trying to open up a new front in this war. Rather, it's only protecting its own border and is willing to work with the UN, as ineffective as they are definitely going to be, to make sure that the situation doesn't get destabilized on yet another front, where Israel's now fighting simultaneously in Gaza, Lebanon, and Syria. But you know what? That very well may be what's going to happen in the coming week.
Turning to Hezbollah, JNS reported the other day, even though we have a ceasefire right now with that terrorist organization, the Lebanese Shiite terrorist organization Hezbollah has already begun rebuilding its military capabilities and financial operations. This is just over a week since Israel declared a ceasefire with Hezbollah after a 13-month war with that terrorist organization. So Hezbollah already, we have this ceasefire, and they're already doing exactly what they're not supposed to be doing, both under the ceasefire and under the original agreement after the 2006 Second Lebanon War. Hezbollah right back at it.
Well, there's definitely no surprise here. Everybody understood that Hezbollah is going to try to A, cut their losses, B, consolidate their strength, and they're going to rebuild themselves however they can, so that they don't lose all power inside Lebanon either, the same way Bashar Assad just lost power inside Syria. Hezbollah can also get run out of Syria. They don't want to do that. They're going to consolidate their power. For them, a ceasefire agreement, this is what's called in Islam a hudna. It's a temporary cessation of violence. They will test the limits of this ceasefire agreement to see exactly how much they can get away with. They also know that when Israel strikes, if they do violate the ceasefire agreement, you have France, you have the United States, and you still have a Biden administration in office. You have the United Nations all condemning Israel for violating the ceasefire. So there's really no penalties for Hezbollah trying to reestablish itself inside southern Lebanon, but Israel's operating. You still have this tit for tat. So on the one hand, it's a ceasefire whereby Hezbollah is not firing long-range weapons, long-range missiles into Israel, and you don't have the IDF doing like significant flyovers and bombing the heck out of southern Lebanon. But it's not a pure ceasefire. There's still, both sides are still operating in each other's zones.
Absolutely. Let's turn our attention now to the southern front. Israel, of course, still at war with Hamas after all this time. Hamas released another propaganda video showing signs of life from one of the Israeli hostages being held in the dungeons of Gaza. Einav Zengauker, the mother of hostage Matan, says that after 14 months of sleepless hell, she has finally seen a sign of life. So Hamas, once again, another propaganda video. At the same time, Hamas officials say that international mediators, including Qatar, have resumed negotiating with that terrorist organization and Israel over a ceasefire in Gaza.
Well, I think, first of all, seeing signs of life of hostages at this point, despite the psychological warfare that Hamas is trying to inflict, is a good thing. It's better to see signs of life than not to see signs of life. It means that Hamas does have some hostages that it could deliver back to Israel. And I think that you actually now are maybe at the closest point that we've been in months, really since that first release of 100 hostages early on in the war, to getting another release of hostages in place. Hamas is very weak. They don't have Hezbollah backing them. Trump is coming into office. He just laid down that statement that there will be all hell to pay if the hostages are not back by January 20th. And I think that Hamas doesn't want to test what those words mean. I mean, it's a little bit of ambivalence as to what those words mean. But Hamas doesn't really have a good incentive to test anybody out. So I think you might get to a chance in the next several weeks. You really have 5 weeks or so before Trump comes into office to get back whatever remaining hostages Hamas has to deliver.
Yes, President-elect Trump saying those responsible will be hit harder than anybody has been hit in the long and storied history of the United States of America. Release the hostages now. Statement from President-elect Trump. At the same time, the Gaza war update. Israel kills a leading terrorist in the Hamas organization there, Osama Ghanim, a senior member of Hamas's internal security force involved in activities to suppress the residents of Gaza, responsible for the terrorist group's violence within the Gaza Strip, the IDF said in a statement. Apparently, this was one terrible individual. Not only did he assist in attacking the state of Israel, but those residents of Gaza who Hamas believed were collaborating with Israel. This guy apparently was a senior in terms of inflicting punishment for anybody deemed to have been doing any sort of business or any sort of dealings with the state of Israel.
Yeah, I mean, it's Israel still has to take care of what's happening in Gaza. The war's not finished there. Hamas hasn't laid down its arms. Maybe we'll get to a point where Hamas declares a ceasefire with Israel. Of course, they'll do what Hezbollah is doing in southern Lebanon, which is trying to rebuild. But meanwhile, as long as there's firefights inside the Gaza Strip, the IDF is going to continue to be active. And Israel should use these last few weeks before a potential ceasefire is put in place to make sure that Hamas loses more and more of its military hold, more and more of its political hold inside the Gaza Strip. And then we're also waiting for Israel to come out and decide, what its vision for the next stage in Gaza actually looks like. We know in southern Lebanon that Israel's not going to rule southern Lebanon. They're going to try to get Hezbollah out of the government there and try to get more Christians running the government there and at least a less extreme government. In Gaza, who's going to govern? You want to take Hamas out. You don't necessarily want the Palestinian Authority to go in there because they're the flip side of the same coin as Hamas. So we have to wait to see what Israel determines is going to be the next phase. Is that going to be some international force putting its boots on the ground and trying to govern Gaza? Is that going to be the IDF having some kind of provisional military governments inside the Gaza Strip?
Israel has not laid down its policy for the day after, but eventually it will have to do so. Let's turn our attention now to Saudi Arabia. Prince Turki Al Faisal, Saudi Arabia's intelligence chief for the last 2 decades, made some scathing remarks against the state of Israel, accusing Israel of genocide and apartheid. He said Israel was genocidal and an apartheid state. He hoped Prime Minister Netanyahu will be brought before the International Criminal Court. He also hoped that incoming U.S. President-elect Donald Trump would bring peace to the Middle East. Let's take a look at his comments on video.
I said from this podium that Israel is the last Western colonial power in the Middle East. The Israeli government has gone a step further than that. Israel today, according to international human rights groups, is not only an apartheid colonial state, but it is also a genocidal one. It is committing genocide on the people of Gaza.
So there you have the prince there in Saudi Arabia making these comments at a conference in Bahrain. So my question is, do we have to take these comments at face value? How important are they? I mean, we've been talking about normalization and the opportunity for normalization on our show for a long time. We know that it's going to wait until President Trump takes over. Is this prince here in Saudi Arabia, is he trying to just appease his Arab neighbors? Is he trying to make it look like that he cares very much about the situation of the so-called Palestinians in Gaza? Or, is this really how he feels? Does he believe that Israel is carrying out apartheid and Netanyahu should be tried at the ICC? What kind of game is he playing here?
Well, we see that the Saudis are definitely playing a double game. You have Saudis that have been talking about normalization for a long time. There's many Israelis and Jewish Americans and other Americans that have gone over to Saudi Arabia. I've spoken to Saudi leaders and have coming back said that Saudis don't care at all about the Palestinians. They see the Palestinians as the problem. They see significant benefits to normalization. And it's well believed that the Saudis were not only complicit, but gave their stamp of approval to the Abraham Accords agreements signed by Bahrain as well as the United Arab Emirates. At the same time, there's been throughout the entire process statements just like these holding Israel account for all the problems in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, all the problems in the Middle East, and really they both represent some part of the dynamic, and certainly even as the Saudi leadership is expressing a willingness to normalize relations with Israel, it doesn't mean that the Saudi street is ready necessarily to normalize with Israel, which is the case in Egypt, where you have Mohammed al-Sisi, the president of Egypt, maintaining some degree of close and stable relations with Israel. Let's say before this whole war with Hamas on October 7th, Israel was counting on al-Sisi as an ally. But the Egyptian street is still quite anti-Israel because the leadership hasn't yet taken the steps to change the views of the Arabs on that Arab street. So I think that both of these things are correct. There's nothing new here in terms of these types of statements. Israel's going to have to work through them. And also, it's a reminder that even when you do create some kind of normalization agreement, that it's not perfect, right? It's not like all of a sudden you're in a relationship with long lost brothers and let's let bygones be bygones. Yes, there's reasons for going ahead with normalization, but you're still dealing with populations that are really anti-Semitic, and there's no other way to say it.
Yeah, the leadership, though, in Saudi Arabia, of course, also concerned about an Iranian nuclear weapon, and I think it's just a matter of time once President Trump takes over. I would not be surprised if very, very shortly after they change their tune and are more than willing to sign a normalization deal with Israel. At the same time, you have Amnesty International, that good old so-called human rights organization, accusing Israel of genocide. Amnesty International released its latest broadside against Israel on Thursday, again accusing the Jewish state of committing genocide in Gaza. Ironically, maybe, I guess, Amnesty Israel going against their parent organization, saying, no, Israel did not carry out genocide in Gaza, is not carrying genocide in Gaza. Our very own Ruthie Bloom wrote a piece on this, saying the following: laden with hyperbolic hostility and proof gleaned from bogus Hamas data, it portrays Israel, the Amnesty International report, our defensive war against the Iranian-backed terrorists as the deliberate attempt by a criminal regime in Jerusalem to annihilate a whole population of Palestinians. Obviously, that is not true. That is not the case. Israel is not carrying out genocide. Yet the so-called, and I say that very, very strongly, the so-called human rights group accusing Israel of genocide in Gaza. No surprises here, Alex.
No surprises at all. I mean, it's Amnesty International, it's the International Criminal Court, the International Court of Justice, it's the UN Security Council, it's Human Rights Watch. I mean, Amnesty International, they're just members of the club, and they're doing exactly what they're being asked to do by whoever is controlling the agenda in these places. Interesting that you mentioned that Amnesty Israel came out against that statement, in part because they don't want to get thrown out of the country. Now, I don't know who runs Amnesty Israel personally. I imagine that they're probably more progressive than Netanyahu and the members of his cabinet. But at the same time, if they will come out and support that statement, they'll soon find themselves out of business, because they'll be shut down the same way Israel's going and trying to shut down UNRWA and maybe taking other steps to make some of these agencies irrelevant in Israel. So Amnesty Israel they still want to keep their office open. So they're slamming their parent organization for what they're doing. It's double games all around.
Yeah, Amnesty International. I'm still waiting for the report on the October 7th massacre carried out by Hamas. I guess we'll have to wait longer because they have not put out anything on that at all. It's another one of these organizations that as you mentioned, essentially acting as a humanitarian arm of the Hamas terrorist organization, along with UNRWA and all the rest. One other topic here. Let's finish on some positive news here. Senator Tom Cotton, a key Republican ally of President-elect Donald Trump, introduced legislation in the Senate on Thursday, if enacted, would prohibit the federal government from using the term West Bank to refer to the Israeli territory, which we reclaimed in the 1967 war of survival, of self-defense, the Six-Day War. So for those who don't know me, I don't use the term West Bank. I refer to it as Judea and Samaria. It's only been called the West Bank since Jordan began their illegal occupation of Israel back in 1949, only lasted till 1967. Judea and Samaria is not only the biblical term, it is the correct term. It's a term that's been used for 2,000 years here, minus those 19 years of the illegal Jordan occupation. So this is some positive news here with Senator Top Cotton, a staunch ally of the state of Israel, introducing this legislation, which would make it a federal mandated law referring to the territory as Judea and Samaria. I love this. I can't thank him enough for standing on the side of Israel and introducing this legislation. Those of us in the public diplomacy sphere have been, screaming for years, saying, call it Judea and Samaria. Don't be fooled by the propaganda, and don't use the terms West Bank, which is an artificial term enacted by the illegal Jordanians who occupied that area.
Well, of course, the reason why the international community wants to call it the West Bank is because when you call it the West Bank and you call it the West Bank of the Jordan River, then even though the Jordan River is only a few meters wide in its widest point, it demonstrates that Jews don't have a right to be there. If you call this property Judea, well, who else is supposed to be there except for Judeans? If we call the territory Samaria, well, that's the Good Samaritans, right? It's not the Islamic extremists, Palestinians. So they don't want you to know that this disputed territory is the only county in the world called Judea. They want you to think that it's some kind of Palestinian territory that Jews somehow wandered into and don't want to leave. But I think that the statement by Cotton is very important, and it's a sort of continuation of the Trump 45 administration, whereby Secretary of State Mike Pompeo came out and basically reversed this Hansel memo from the late 1970s that stated that that settlement in Judea and Samaria is illegal. So Pompeo turned around and said, no, settlement in Judea and Samaria is not illegal under international law. And of course, the Biden administration comes in and they reinstate the Hansel memo. They reverse the Pompeo doctrine. Here, Cotton demonstrating that with the Trump 47 administration, we're going to get back on that track that we were on before. And we're going to start to reintroduce the concept of Jewish indigenous rights in the only territory in the world called Judea and Samaria. And we have to see if that will ultimately lead toward the application of sovereignty. I think this is the big question that's on everybody's mind moving into a Trump 47 administration with regard to U.S.-Israel relations. Will this Trump administration permit Israel to declare its sovereignty in these disputed territories of Judea and Samaria that the Biden administration and Western Europe and Amnesty International and the ICC and the UN all want to see be taken away from Israel and be handed to the Palestinian Authority for the creation of a Palestinian state?
Yes, some would argue that the Pompeo doctrine actually was the most significant accomplishment under the first Trump administration. Let's see what happens under the second. But let's just remember this, folks. Jews are from Judea. It's that simple. It's that clear. It's the most natural thing in the world for Jews to live in Judea. Let's call it by its name, Judea and Samaria. Alex, anything you want to talk about over there in the U.S.? What else are you going to be doing this week?
Well, I'll be having several meetings in New York, then down to Florida for several speaking engagements, really trying to discuss with individuals who all want to know what's going on in Israel, how the United States, how Israel are going to reset relations in this new administration. What does Israel's war strategy look like moving forward? Now, after the declaration of ceasefire with Lebanon, now seeing what's happening in Syria, you kind of have to rewrite the lecture almost every day around here as breaking news changes the entire status quo. People want to connect to Israel. Everybody wants to know what's going on. And so we'll be bringing them the message, bringing them the analysis, and making sure that people at home know what the number one site that they should go to for news and analysis on Israel and the Middle East is none other than Jewish News Center.
No doubt about it. Go to jns.org for all the latest breaking news. It is a very, very fast news cycle. Things are changing all the time. From yesterday to today, the world is a different place. Alex Trayman, CEO of JNS. Good luck to you over there in the United States. And I guess we'll talk again via video next week. Shout out before we go to Ryan Lifshitz, behind the scenes, Avi Eisner, and Zach Sickerman for all the work they do to make Jerusalem Minute a reality. My name is Josh Haston. We are in the eternal capital of the state of Israel. and the Jewish people's eternal capital, Jerusalem. Thanks so much for joining us. As Alex said, go to jns.org for all the latest breaking news, and make sure you go to JNS TV for amazing content and analysis from everything going on in Israel and the Middle East. Have a great week, everybody.